to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome Microsoft Vice President Georg Glantschnig. Georg joined Microsoft in 2019 after many years in and around the SAP world, and he now has overall responsibility for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations Solutions. His official title is VP for Dynamics 365 AI ERP. Georg shares his perspective on how ERP has evolved over the years, right up to and including Microsoft's newest release wave 1 2024 plans for D365 Finance, supply chain management, project operations, and commerce. I asked Georg about the launch of the latest XP&A capabilities, how his team is approaching AI scenarios and Copilot capabilities, priorities around the One Dynamics One Platform initiative, and Microsoft's efforts more generally to keep D365 ERP-related solutions aligned with Power Platform and the rest of the company's commercial technology stack. All right, well, Georg, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for inviting me, and great to be here.
All right, excellent. Well, I think a lot of our listeners will recognize your name and know who you are, but I thought we could maybe start by just asking you for a bit of your Microsoft history and maybe your professional history, even going back a little further, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in the ERP market, I think, since the late 90s. Not exposing my age here, but a couple of years already. And in the past, at least, ERP was not always the most exciting topic, people talked about in the enterprise application space, but I think it's absolutely now super exciting because I think there's a great future, and maybe we can also talk a little about the changes, we see in the ERP space. But to introduce myself quickly to the audience, Georg Glantschnig, you're maybe wondering, what is this accent? Does this sound a little bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger English? As yet is, as I'm from Austria. I spent 15 years of my business career with the largest German software company in Germany, and started, in consulting space with finance, cost accounting, and then moved into product development. I had a chance then in 2012 to move to Silicon Valley, California. Was in addition, doing some things with CRM as in customer service, customer sales, and then joined Microsoft in 2019, took over the Dynamics portfolio for ERP, also building it basically out. And when we talk about Dynamics ERP, we talk about Dynamics Finance, HR, supply chain, project operations, and commerce. Also living in Seattle. Seattle is fantastic. Love the outdoors and skiing, but of course, after 7 years in California, I always say it makes you a little bit weak. Got used to the sunshine, so maybe still missing the sunshine a little bit.
I can understand that. Well, thanks for that. And I was looking back a bit in sort of my Microsoft coverage from like 2019 when you joined the company, right? Just to sort of remind myself of what was going on then, because I don't know, as the years go on, I have trouble sort of picking a year and remembering. And I picked out a couple of things that I thought might have been relevant, or that you might remember too from around the time that you joined the Dynamics sort of ERP team. One of them was that Microsoft had made the decision to sort of split apart finance and operations into sort of the supply chain management product and the finance product. And that was one of the big things at that time. Was that sort of at the time that you were joining, was that a big deal?
I would say it was I call it like an evolution. We kind of felt, if you want to be, best in finance, you have to focus on finance. If you want to be best in supply chain, you have to focus on supply chain. So I think, with Dynamics, we started as a native cloud product. So we have a little bit, less years maybe than our competitors who started earlier in this space. But of course, with all this technology legacy they're carrying, we wanted to start with a product focus first. And then the natural evolution after that comes, where I think we have established a really good functional portfolio in these functional categories. We move now to more like the process excellence. And so we see in the market that more and more customers, also in larger enterprise, appreciate the best of suite approach. Also, they want to, have these end-to-end processes. They want to have one process data model, they have the one analytical data model, and then they can basically build all this great stuff, which is now also enabled with AI. They can basically build on top and leverage. So I think this was a little bit the evolution maybe you have seen between the 2019 now going into the times of today.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly trace from the outside, sort of how things have evolved since then with the different product offerings, I guess you'd say. And and where they are now. And maybe that's a good point to step off into sort of the present, right? Because I would love to hear your perspective on how you describe, what some of those latest milestones are, what the most interesting things that you would tell somebody today if they were sort of getting acquainted with the products that you are responsible for these days. Like, where do you start?
I like to, see it almost like a journey in ERP and maybe just, to put some of these important milestones into perspective. And I'm sure many will remember who have been in this market for a little bit more than a couple of years that, ERP went to, I would say, two big shifts in software paradigm. So in the 90s, we talked about the on-premise and the client-server architecture, and ERP basically was built, we call it like a process-centric approach, meaning it was the first time really trying to, map business processes into software. And then you were trying to, train your end users until they kind of understood how to use the software. And was interesting at this time is that, training costs for end users were higher than implementation costs. And then, I think so in the 2000s, the first big shift came, with mobile, with internet technologies, where we saw another big shift in software paradigm because now it was more like a user-centric approach. So the user was in the center, and the software basically was built around the user to help them with executing on these processes. But I think we are now at the next big shift, what we call like AI-led ERP, which is more like data-centric, where the data basically sits in the center, and the data gives you this, these insights, gives you, of course, also the patterns for automation, and drives basically, the execution of business processes. And I would say there's these two big categories. If you look at ERP, we have, more like the operational processes. There's a huge potential, for efficiency gains, for productivity gains, for automation. And then we have the strategic decision making, where you want to leverage your data insights, and then guide the user and help the user. So I think this is really sort of the focus we have right now in our portfolio. So, having now, also the cloud for us is a given. So we have all the data there. So how can we basically make this next move, with all the good things Microsoft is offering with the Microsoft Cloud, to make this next transition really get maybe these productivity gains everybody's now expecting from these new Gen AI models. So that's a little bit, this is my focus in our portfolio. We are really driving.
Yeah, it's a complicated set of, I guess, priorities to balance in combination between the technology you actually use to implement it and the requirements and priorities and, I guess, planning your products. I don't know, is it more complex than it used to be in terms of some of the decisions that you and your team are making about how to actually bring some of those things to life?
So I think there's a shift in priorities. So that's absolutely there. So I think as long as you have clear priorities, I would say the execution is kind of the same. I think the confusion starts if you don't have priorities. So I would say the shift, for example, we are seeing now in our engineering and product teams is, as at the end, of course, we're always trying to solve customer pain points. So there's a customer problem, there's a customer pain point, and we are trying to help customers in the context of ERP. How can we solve this? So I think the thinking and prioritization which is now shifting is, can we solve these pain points with these new exponential technologies, maybe in a better way, maybe in a different way, maybe in a more, also in a cheaper way if you talk about economics. So I think it's more like a shift on how do you try to solve customer pain points with the technology you have at your hands. And that's the big shift we are seeing, that we are trying to look at these customer pain points from a data-first approach. So I think this is the big shift on how we try to address these scenarios and how we basically, stacked up our Copilot scenarios as well.
All right. As we're recording this, Microsoft just revealed sort of its release wave plans for 2024, release wave 1. So I thought we could maybe at least talk about a little of that. We don't have time to really go deep on it, obviously, but a couple of the priorities or a couple of the interesting things that I saw that I think fall under your areas of focus and responsibility. One that I've heard multiple times is demand planning and the new enhancements coming in that for finance and I guess supply chain management. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where does that fall in sort of the importance or the scale of the updates that are coming?
I'm so happy to do so. It was a big delivery from our side. And maybe I'm trying to first summarize a little bit, the bigger themes we were driving. I think we talked, in the beginning, we are going more from product-centric to process-centric. And so a first step for us was can we help our customers, to deliver predefined analytical data models, for your order to cash, for your procure to pay processes, for your record to report, so that customers don't have to think about, how do I build all these analytical models from the transactional data you normally have in an ERP system. And the same for the process side, because I think the combination of data and processes, I think, is then where you can really get insights and make decisions. So we delivered this whole layer of processes and data models. And with this delivery now, we have, the capabilities of delivering these end-to-end planning scenarios. So I think, in the past, if you thought about planning, I think financial planning maybe was the most used term out there. But of course, financial planning at the end is summarization of all the other planning activities you're doing. You have to plan your sales, you have to plan your workforce, you have to plan in your supply chain. And yes, everything kind of impacts the financial planning you're doing. And then, of course, there's different horizons. And I think the one thing we saw with the pandemic is that maybe planning was something companies did once a year. And it was maybe a cumbersome process. It maybe took months, you start maybe somewhere in December, but then maybe it's March until you agree on your plan. And then normally, this was maybe a file stored somewhere, but not really people looking at it maybe frequently. Yeah? But now with the pandemic, things are changing very frequently. So companies had to almost like replan quarterly. Some companies did it monthly, some companies even weekly, to react to these different business changes. So we saw a huge shift in planning. Yeah? So planning became suddenly more real-time. Planning became suddenly much more collaborative. So you have to basically interact with many people in real time so you can make these decisions. So it cannot take 2 months to plan if you have monthly planning cycles. So I think we had a really different approach there, and that's what we delivered now in this latest wave. How we bring, as on the one side, all these planning scenarios together. So we call it like integrated planning, or I think the market also calls it like XP&A, also this cross planning, because you want to have this view. But of course, this means you have to have a consistent data model. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do these planning scenarios. And we basically said, why do we have to force users to learn different front-end tools? Why can they not use, for example, what they're anyway using? As if you look in finance, I would say almost every finance person is using Excel. So why can we not basically do this in the user interface they are aware of? So basically you can do these planning scenarios in Excel, you can do them in Power BI, so you don't have to basically learn a new user interface. And I think you can go much broader with the employees in the companies, because it's very easy for people to contribute because they don't need now a training to learn a new tool. And the third component was the collaboration. So what we have done with many, of course, applications, we are bringing all the goodness of Microsoft together. How can we use the productivity tools, the collaboration tools for Microsoft in the context of the business process? So this is also something you see in this wave, how this is coming together. And we shared, I think, also a pretty exciting scenario. I can also talk about, if there's interest with Domino's Pizza. I think everybody kind of loves pizza.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to get to that. Before we get to sort of more of the forward-looking stuff, I did want to maybe touch on a couple of other areas that are sort of new right now and sort of in the product. And you mentioned the XP&A. That also comes with sort of a finance premium, like new license level. I don't know how important that is, or if you want to talk about that at all. Is that really just to incorporate the XP&A sort of scenario and the different demands there? Or is that something that we could see like a premium level license or role for D365 users sort of being built out in other ways in the future?
I don't think it's dramatic. Yeah? So that's my opinion. So what we are trying, so it's a concept you see also in other Dynamics workloads. Yeah? So it's not now finance specific. I think we have delivered a lot of good things and updates and innovations, in the different categories, like, in finance, like in supply chain, commerce, project operations. And we're trying to make it really easy for customers also to do business with us. Yeah? So we didn't want to make it now super complicated, but we felt for certain scenarios, for example, like in the XP&A space, you have a different user categories. You have a user who is maybe just looking at the planning results, because you are an executive or you are a manager. So you're not really contributing, but you want to see the results. So this is basically anyway covered with the licenses we have already. Then you have, business units who want to maybe just contribute to the existing templates. For example, if a workforce planning template, you need somebody maybe from project team or maybe somebody from HR to contribute there. So these users we also have already basically covered in our pricing model. But now we have we call it the finance people who are creating these models, also who are really owning, for example, a planning template. And this basically, also this super user, if you want to call them like this would be, for example, included then in the premium SKU. So you would then, in addition to the finance user who can do all the good things I already described before, the FP&A team, for example, would then buy this premium SKU.
Yeah, another area that seems like it's made advances from what I could tell was some of the like one version type of work. Have you had feedback on? And specifically, I'm thinking of sort of this transition that your team, I think, is making right now to sort of change the cadence of updates over the course of the year, those periodic updates. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of that seems like an important one for existing customers and preparing for that. Can you tell me a little bit more about the feedback on that change?
Also the feedback, I mean, these kind of things, we are basically also doing based on customer feedback. So it's also most of our features are driven by, we call it like idea plays. We do customer advisory board meetings, where we are sitting together with our customers and, of course, collecting their feedback, but also trying to share a little bit, what our thinking is. So we are normally planning 6 to 12 months ahead, also 2 waves. We have the same with partners. And as you said, I think one thing we are trying to make easier is, that we are in harmony, so that we are basically doing this updates in a synchronized way because, we have platform components, we have different dynamics components so that this gets much easier than also for, of course, customers to plan for. Because, sometimes if there is customers decide to maybe take up a bigger functional enhancement, maybe talked about planning, for example, in the past, we shipped subscription billing, which is a pretty massive business process we covered. So customers want to do also some testing. And then, of course, we want to make this easier for customers that these kind of things are in sync so they don't have to worry about dependencies. And also this is one important thing. And of course, I think the acceptance of the cloud, I would say we are very, very far already now. If I remember, even in 2019, when I joined Microsoft, but of course also before, there was still certain skepticism sometimes of companies, can I trust the cloud? How is the quality? How are the updates? But I feel there is a lot of trust now, and we have proven it, with every update that things, are working. So this motion of the cloud or the promise of the cloud, there is no upgrade anymore. Everybody is always on the latest version. I think is a real great benefit where we also see customers are much more excited about, but also trusting us, that Microsoft knows how to do it because we have proven it to them many, many times.
I was actually just thinking about this fact, that let's say 2018, 2019, a lot of customers were onboarding to D365 in the cloud at that point for finance and operations applications. 4 years later, 5 years later, those companies are now like kind of have been living in that world for a really measurable amount of time. So I think they must have really adapted in some interesting ways.
So absolutely. Also it takes time. Every bigger shift, and the move to the cloud, it was a big shift. As I explained before, it takes time that, first you have to explain customers how you do it, but then of course you also have to prove it to them, but you also have to show them how do you mitigate in case something goes wrong. Because as you know, yes, sometimes things can go wrong, and at least they want to know that, yes, if something goes wrong, Microsoft can very fast help them to get services up and running again, or then deal with some, whatever, if there's some data missing or these kind of things. I think there's a lot of trust in Microsoft, how we run the cloud for mission critical processes, and ERP is absolutely mission critical. So specifically, if you go into demand planning, supply chain, as you outlined before, these are processes which are super mission critical. So there is also outage is not an option there.
Okay, well, before we move on, I know we've talked already about the release wave. We touched on a couple of things. I had a couple others on my mind. I don't think we have time for all of them, but maybe if I gave you a couple that I was thinking about, one was like automated bank reconciliation, tax automation, the standalone warehouse management capabilities. Are any of those, if you had to pick one to mention here or more, would you call out those or something else that you think people listening should pay attention to?
Everybody listening and interested, please, look also at our release update we just posted, and, give us feedback, of course, as well. A lot of exciting stuff we have shipped. I think that the ones you mentioned, I would say there's these two categories where we think we can really help customers to make impact and difference. Also, you mentioned a couple of which I would call automation scenarios. So I think there's a lot of scenarios, where specifically now with these new advancements in AI, we can help customers to do things semi-automated so that they at the end only have to worry about exceptions. So we have done this also for the complete invoice process. So we started with how do you get the invoice into the system? Also, with how do you scan the invoice? How do you bring them in? But then also how do you get this invoice through the system, with all the matching you have to do. And at the end, customers just want to understand from the thousands of invoices, which are the ones where I have to interfere because there's something wrong. But again, even if something is wrong, can the system help me to at least look at the right place? I don't have to again start from scratch, like, oh, here's the invoice, and then try to compare it. So the ones you mentioned, I think, again, this is just a couple of things we have already delivered, but there's this whole category of how can we make operational processes much more efficient. So this is, I think, the one category. And then the other one with warehouse management, for example, what the customers also really appreciate is, as we call it, like an composable ERP. And when I say composable, means our ERP functions. It's not like a black box, and it's not like there's this big thing, and you have to use it as is. So it's basically it's one platform, and we have all these functionalities on this platform. But a customer can decide on their own pace how they want to use it. Some customers are saying, I would like to start with finance. So basically, it's I cannot show it now since this is audio, but it's like, you switch on a button in the system and now you have the finance capabilities. And then you can say, maybe the next thing is HR, or maybe now you would to go into supply chain, or if you are service-centric industries like professional services, you would like to have, more the project functionalities or the subscription billing functionalities. So these are all things, you can choose at your own pace how to switch it on. And warehouse is something similar, where some customers are saying, specifically in the retail scenarios, this would be great, if this is a place, can I start with my warehousing to maybe optimize them? So it's, as at the end, it's one platform, and there's one, it's one process model, it's one data model, but it gives us this flexibility of switching components on and off at the pace customers want to do it, so they don't have to deal with this complexity. So that's a little bit the meta idea behind these things.
All right, excellent. You had mentioned a few minutes ago a scenario with Domino's. I don't know if do any of the things we talked about sort of relate back to that customer and what they've done?
Also, Domino's is one of these, I think, really, really great examples, and easy to understand. Also, Domino's is a retail company in UK, also a pizza company, and as I said, I think everybody kind of loves pizza, so easy to understand what they're doing. And just for the background, I think in 2022, if I remember correctly, so pizza, I think they sold more like 100 million pizzas. So we're talking about a large scale organization in about more than 1,000 locations in the United Kingdom, and they have about more than 30,000 employees, and they're really focused on customer experience, and they want to deliver the right product to the right store in the right time. So it's a lot about inventory planning, which is pretty complex because the demand of pizza depends on many factors. It can be events, it can be weather. So it's a very complex problem to solve. And there, of course, AI was super helpful for us. So with the functionality we just talked about, also the AI-driven demand planning, we could really help Domino's, to get rid of, all these single spreadsheets where people are trying to, gain access on, put some signals in there and thinking about some historical events. And of course, a lot of knowledge, maybe which sits in different people's brains. How can we bring this together into a tool with AI support, to make this a much better experience? And I think they have done a fantastic job there, to use now these demand models, and saw a lot of improvements also from an environmental perspective, because at the end, if you're planning wrongly in their business, it basically means you have to throw stuff away. But of course, you also want to, really fulfill the demand of the customers, so that they're not coming to a store and then you don't have the right inventory there. So I just talked with them recently. So we had some, if I remember, if I'm trying to quote as a demand planning, I think for their customers how they did it before. It was a huge difference. So what they are kind of trying to achieve is, if we are doing planning correct, basically what they are saying is, we know that customers want the pizza on Thursday before they even know it, that they want the pizza on Thursday. So that's a little bit the level of personalization they're driving with this AI-driven demand planning, which is pretty exciting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And it's great to have a customer or a case like that where there's some things that are really working at a very high scale of data inputs and customer numbers, right? Those are big customer numbers, I'm sure. A lot of transactions on the customer side and probably on the supply side.
Absolutely. And that's where AI is then also, of course, interesting. As if you have this huge amount of data, but then also, high frequency, and then you have to react also in short time. So you cannot just digest this anymore yourself, by scrolling through, thousands of lines and trying to figure out what's the pattern. So there, I think AI can bring a lot of help to people who are responsible for these planning processes.
Well, I think there's a lot of organizations out there that, would hear a story like that, and they're still thinking about how they would get themselves more in line with that kind of level of capabilities, right? I mean, not everyone is there yet, but I think for the purposes of our discussion here today, I do want to move ahead with like what some of your priorities are as you look to the next year, let's say, of pure sort of finance and operations application priorities, but also maybe some of your cross-product scenarios. Can you sort of give us maybe the high level first of sort of how you look out into the future and how you and your team are planning?
Absolutely. So the things we are trying to focus on, and also maybe I use a couple of minutes to also summarize a little bit, the big shift we are seeing and why, and that's kind of then also defines our focus. Also, I mean, I'm sure you heard a lot about Gen AI and Copilots. I think there's, of course, maybe it's a little bit overhyped right now, as I think you read it everywhere. It's really hard to understand, what's marketing, what's real product. In Microsoft, we're always focused on really showing custom examples, and we have already a lot of these Copilot scenarios out in the market where we can get real customer and user feedback to understand and learn. And also, for example, we have shipped in project management. So if you're a professional service company and you're using basically our ERP to manage your business, of course, a lot of the things you have to do there is to, staff projects. You have then to write project summaries. You have to do project risk report. And again, Copilot can help project managers, for example, to, go to the system and make a proposal for a project summary report. So you get nice with graphics, with all the financials, with the summary, with the stuffing, and then also risk. Basically, the AI would basically find the system. Again, this is a proposal. You can edit it, you can change it, but it's always easier to start at 80% than at 0%. And if you have to do this every week or every second week, it's a huge help there. Or the same in procurement, where we can help people who basically have to find suppliers with certain criteria. It has to meet a certain price tag, it has to meet a certain quality criteria, it has to be delivered in certain time. The system can help you to find these are the right suppliers, based on historical data, and Copilot basically can guide you through the process. Also, our focus is really to find more and more, of these scenarios where we either can help customers make the operational processes more efficient, or we can help them with Copilot to make, better strategic decisions. So these are the two meta themes, we are focusing on. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, for us, it's a journey. So I think it's very important, to basically guide the customers and users through this journey. As sometimes I think, if you look about navigation system in cars, I don't even know when they came into the cars, but I'm sure 15 years ago or so, when in the beginning, you saw people using them, but there was still somebody sitting, on the side seat with a map and saying, is it really left? Is it really right? Let's check it first. So there was this kind of skepticism, but I would say now, if the system says left, you go left. If it says right, you go right. So there's a certain trust that navigation systems, they work pretty well. And we see a similar journey for these AI advancements. So therefore, the priority we're setting for ourselves in our portfolio is following kind of a low stake to high stake theme. And what I mean by this is, as a low stake basically means the scenarios we are delivering, for example, now in this wave and the next wave, they're more focused on how can we guide the user. So how can the system basically help the user to answer questions? So it's more like, you have questions, how can I do certain things? Give me proposals. I would call it's low stake. And then we are moving now more into what they call empower users. So empower user basically means, can the system help you, to find insights in the data, or maybe generate reports a little bit like I mentioned before, like a project summary or a financial summary. But still, the user is empowered and I think sees the benefits, but it's basically for the user. And then again, if we increase the stakes a little bit more, then how can we help to make better decisions? How can we help to find outliers? How can we help to assess impact? How can we optimize for the best actions? And then the last stage, which is a little bit our vision in ERP, is how can we go to an autonomous system? So how can we help to make autonomous actions? So how can you look at certain processes and really automate them end to end? And as I said before, and the system basically just indicates and helps with exception handling. So these are the stages basically we are going through, and you see now in all our workloads in finance, in supply chain, project operations, HR, more and more of these Copilot enabled scenarios are coming to the market, where we hopefully either help the user to make operation processes more effective, or we help the users to make better or faster decisions. So that's a little bit the meta theme out there.
So I've certainly heard from MVPs or partners that I talk to, or who write online or whatever, that they're obviously watching very closely to see which of these scenarios get traction, which ones Microsoft decides to really push forward, which ones customers like, obviously. It seems like the conventional wisdom out there is that some of the capabilities will really succeed and become very popular. And, your team will continue to develop them out and improve them and add to them and so forth. But then others might end up, kind of fading away, proving to be less interesting to customers or whatever. Is that a fair way to position how Microsoft is sort of approaching, from a product planning perspective, how it will evolve?
Absolutely, and I like how you framed it. So we're doing these things from the beginning together with partners and customers. As we have a cycle which we call preview, and then we're going into GA. So therefore, we first start, of course, trying to understand which are the pain points. Then how can we address them, with these Gen AI's technologies. But then also inviting our partners and customers in a preview program, it's kind of a closed program. So these customers cannot go productive with this thing, but they can use it, they can test it, they can give us feedback. So this is the first, I would say, proof point we have. Are we onto something? Does it really deliver the business value we promised? And is this really, something customers can also adapt in their operations or in the organization models? Because at the end, we don't want to now completely change an organization, as it should help from day one on. And then, of course, at the end, we are measuring success by usage, impact, and we are all in a learning phase here. So I think this is, it's a new territory with, huge expectations. So therefore, our focus was always to be as fast but responsible out there in the market to really understand and get the feedback. Mm-hmm. And we have seen, maybe I can summarize, as we have already, tens of thousands of customers using it. So we see already some patterns which are maybe interesting to share. So we have, of course, also done a lot of research, which is now more general. But at least on the promises we had out there, 70% of the customers we did research on said that they saw productivity gains, and it's not about productivity only, as also 68% of the customers we researched on also confirmed that there is improved quality of work, because you also have to understand, specifically, in ERP, some of these tasks, they're not super exciting. It's a very repetitive, mundane task. So there's also, I think there's more excitement for employees coming if the system can really help them maybe to focus on some other thing which are more exciting or more impactful. But I would say, from a pattern perspective, if you look at the three things we see, the first one is still, it's trust. As customers clearly want to, understand how does the system, make these proposals, decision summaries. So therefore, as I explained, these low stake tasks, as if it's more about guidance, if it's more about empowerment, we see much higher adoption there, because it's still, the end user is still much more in control. So this is a pattern we have seen, across the board. And business value, I would say, customers are mostly measuring right now in time savings. So this is the conversations we have. If a process takes, X minutes, can we reduce it by a certain amount and make it more efficient. So the conversation mostly is about time saving, but we also see now also customers measuring not only time saving but also kind of satisfaction, as I outlined before. And then I think lastly, customers also want to have this flexibility. So of course we deliver things how we think they should be. As again, if we take this example of project summary or project risk report, customers still want to have then the flexibility to say, okay, this makes sense, but in my company, I want to kind of decide or consider what do I think a risk is. So there's a certain configuration customers also want to do. So this, I would say, are the three bigger patterns we have seen already from all the customers using our Copilot scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, one of the larger conversations about AI today in the market is the cost for the sort of underlying service and then what our customers are going to pay. I mean, is that something that you're hearing from Microsoft customers? Are they wondering about what is this going to cost them in the long term when it becomes a production or generally available type of feature? And can you share what you've revealed so far about, if anything, about what costs are going to look like for adding these capabilities?
In the scenarios, I would say there's two categories. So there's the scenarios basically we are delivering as part of our solution. So for example, I talked about project managed summary, I talked about project risk reports. So this is included in our pricing. So if you buying a user for project operations, in this SKU, basically Copilot is included. So that's basically, you don't even have to think about it, any additional things. We have then some offerings we have announced with Copilot for sales. So this is not now in the ERP category, but this would be now in the category of customer relation management. There is a SKU basically you can then purchase and you get then these Copilot for sales capabilities. But again, this is also a user-based pricing. So I think it's pretty predictable. I think when you talk about costs, then it's also about, we have an infrastructure and a platform, as we call it, like Copilot Studio, where customers can themselves basically, create Copilot scenarios or Gen AI scenarios, where then basically this is more like a metering thing. And then it depends on, this is more like a consumption-based model. So how much do you consume basically from these Gen AI models to solve your problem? And I would say in this context, I think, of course, price is one input, but of course, at the end, it's more important what's the value and is the value higher than the price. But I just saw it today, the announcements from OpenAI, the new models. Also, again, not the expert here now, but I just saw that most of the OpenAI services, I think they're now 30 to 50% reduced in price. So I think what I'm saying is, we're just at the beginning, and there's so much potential, I think, to making these models much more, effective, but also much cheaper in usage, that I think this will follow a very similar curve, you maybe saw in computer memory. As it was also very expensive, but now we're almost at, it's almost like a zero cost per byte, or also there's a lot of this technology, I think, advancements you see where you have an, exponential reduction of costs. And I think we will see similar stuff in this space.
I'm certainly no expert in it either, but this conversation that I've seen about which models are more costly or less costly and which ones are really needed in different scenarios seems to be an interesting one for the future, across different use cases, not just here. The other sort of forward-looking thing I wanted to get some feedback from you on was where the One Dynamics, One Platform, goals are and where you see that project or initiative going in the next year.
I can give you maybe one example, so when I said we think about end-to-end processes, also this is one aspect, but I think the even more powerful aspect from my perspective is, how we can bring all the goodness of Microsoft, together to help solve customer pain points. And the main components for me is, we have business processes. We are running them, in the cloud. But of course, you want to also offer a kind of a platform where partners can, for example, help us to deliver micro verticals. So we are more focused on horizontal processes. Partners can help us to, deliver micro verticals, or customers basically can use the platform. I call it to do the last mile. The things which is maybe not standard, for a cloud solution, but it's very important for these customers. That's how they differentiate. And you want to do this seamlessly. So you want to basically have our applications, our data models, and then you can basically build on top and not have it as a side project, where you have to say, okay, now I use a platform, I take everything out and I have to start from scratch and have to worry about how does this whole thing fit together. And then comes a new update and everything breaks. So I think Microsoft has really solved this cloud motion of, you can extend, you can configure, and you're always on the latest versions, and you get all these innovations continuously coming out, and you're basically running on this same super fast train. And then the other aspect, of course, is all these collaboration tools, the productivity tools. How can we also bring them seamlessly together for our end users? Because people are using PowerPoint, they're using Outlook, they're using Teams. Many of these business processes, they're even running there. If you think about in finance, if you think about collections, so you trying to get money from your customers to make sure you have a positive cash flow. This is mostly done, in maybe in Teams environment, maybe with emails, but of course you need all your business data, and how can we bring, these things together so it's seamlessly. So that's where I see, the strengths of one Microsoft, and of course we're all running on the Azure platform, which is the most scalable, secure enterprise platform globally. So we can also deliver these services, basically with all the privacy and data constraints we have to consider for different states, for different continents. I think these are all these aspects where I feel this, one Microsoft comes together, and is a very strong value proposition.
Yeah, one element of it, another element, I guess, that seems really interesting to me is sort of the solutions that sort of blend the F&O sort of technical platform with Power Platform capabilities. I saw quite a bit of that, in release wave plans and so forth, things like virtualization in Dataverse, or virtual tables, I guess you'd say, in Dataverse, and the sort of the build out of solutions that are already out there in various states of maturity that use both Power Platform and like F and SCM data and F and SCM processes together. Is that something that's going to sort of just continue to expand in your view?
Absolutely. And maybe a good example now in my portfolio is project operations. So we, as I said, in our ERP portfolio, we support customers who are more like in product-centric industries, like, manufacturing, retail. This is, mostly supply chain, finance, HR, procurement. And then we have service-centric industries, financial services, like professional services companies, which is more like, project management, financials, of course, also HR, and then more like indirect procurement. And for example, with project operations, the solution we delivered to the market is a real end-to-end solution for, let's now use a professional service company as an example. How do you sell the project to your customer? How do you staff this project? How do you manage the project plan, and how do you deliver this project? But then how do you do the whole financials, for this project, with the rates of the consultants, the billing, and have this end-to-end visibility of, which project is more profitable? Do I have the right skills? What's the demand for the skills? Can I do the planning for this? So it's a whole end-to-end solution. And now to your point, this combines components of our dynamic sales offering. It has the components, of course, of our finance offering. As I said, it's, you have this sales process, you have the finance processes. It has project for the web, also for modern work, also the components for the project planning. We have scheduling engines, which is used in other components. So we're bringing basically these technologies together. Also with technologies, basically you mentioned, with virtual entities, with dual write, where we basically can connect objects and make sure that from an outside, this is a very seamless process where the customers basically don't have to worry about all these integration points, because it's done basically in the backends by Microsoft.
One interesting thing that came up in a couple of conversations recently with sort of F&O experts was they want to see that using sort of virtual entities and in these scenarios is going to be cost efficient. Is that a concern that you've heard a lot or that you're looking at?
Also, I haven't heard about it now a lot, but I would say there's again two things. Also, I see this now in a context as a department who is delivering solutions to our customers. So therefore, also I have, of course, have an interest in my engineering organization to make things very efficient, because at the end we are not charging every single item to our customers. They're paying a user pricing. And so for us, it's how can we make this most efficient for our customers, and they're paying a user price. And so therefore, these kind of things, of course, we're continuously looking at, how can we make them more efficient? How can we make them more performant? How can we make them also, less consuming of data center capacity? Yeah? So that's, I would say, a normal way of, as we call it, like fundamentals in our engineering team. But then I think the second part of the question is also, of course, now for partners who are using the platform to build certain things. And of course, this occurs costs for them, as they, of course, have also an interest to get these services for a cheaper price. But I'm looking more on the solutions where we are basically using them more like as a service for us, to make these solutions, for example, like project operations happen, but it's not something a customer has to worry about because this is our costs, not theirs. We are running the service.
Yeah, just one other interesting anecdote. Talking to a veteran F&O AX/F&O partner recently, they pretty much told me that when they're looking or talking to a customer about developing something custom now in the context of a finance and supply chain solution, they said they are almost always talking Power Platform first to see if it can be accomplished that way before they talk about any sort of development within the FNSCM environment. I don't know if that's common or you've heard that sentiment before.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is also this is our recommendation and also our approach. Yeah. So you see also many components on our side building on the Power Platform, so that we can also leverage all the great advancements these teams have done. Yeah. So this is it's a good observation and absolutely our recommendation as well. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more time here of yours, but looking out into 2024, where might people see you or hear from you or maybe others from your team this year?
You mean from an event perspective or?
Yeah, events or online or really anywhere.
Also, we have our, call it like the business application launch events. When we talk about our next wave, I think we are starting the planning now for our October wave. We'll announce at least our first early thinking here. I think we have continuous, updates on our Copilot progress. We'll have some launch events there as well. Also, I'm always happy to be invited, in our community sponsored events. Also, Dynamics Communities is doing a lot of events where we are invited and speaking there. And I'm sure there will be many more events coming. So I hope, we will have a lot of good stuff to share, you and our community and our audience.
Yeah, and just as I was preparing for this conversation, I was looking back, and a lot of the times where your name pops up in sort of our coverage is when there are partnerships and when there's, either IP licensing or IP acquisition, something like that over the years. So I'll keep looking for your name in the context of those kinds of announcements, because that's where I tend to see your name the most frequently, I would say, in addition to maybe your blog posts and the writing that you do. So yeah. Well, Georg, thank you so much for taking the time today. Was there anything else you wanted to add? Anything else you wanted to call people's attention to?
Also, thank you for the good questions and the great conversations. As I maybe to close the loop, when I said in the beginning, I have been on ERP for many, many years, but I really think it's extremely exciting times for ERP because I think these two perfect storms are coming together. There is the move from ERP into the cloud, as I think still many customers are on an on-premise version of ERP, and they're seeing all these innovations coming, from data-driven approach, from AI, but you cannot do this on-premise. Yes, I think this shift from the cloud into on-premise, then this rethinking on how can you solve pain points with a data-first approach, I think is coming together in ERP. So there's a lot of momentum we are seeing there and a lot of excitement when you talk with customers, to really redefine maybe how operation processes have been done, how strategic decision making have been done. I think there's a lot of excitement out there, which I absolutely share, and there will be for sure many, many really exciting updates in the future. So really, hopefully, Jason, enjoyed the conversation a lot. Truly, thank you for that. And hopefully we have an opportunity maybe to connect again and talk about maybe a couple of the great stuff we are thinking are coming, then maybe when they're really here and share some more insights.
All right, excellent. Yeah, thank you once again. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Georg for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach me by email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.